It's that time of the month again. Oh, nice. Welcome back to another monthly reading wrap up. These are some of my favorite videos to film and to watch, so I'm so excited that it's the end of the month and we can talk about all of the books that I loved and also didn't love this month. I read 16 books this month, and according to my book journal, I only read 5 of the 12 books that I put on my TBR at the start of this month, which is not fantastic. Out of the 16 books I read, 6 were standalones and 10 were part of a series. You can tell that I love series. I really do. I'm just a series girl at heart. I read 7 romance, 3 fantasy, 2 general fiction, 1 non-fiction, 2 dystopian, and 1 thriller. And we had 3 5-star reads this month, which is amazing. But let's just jump straight into it. The first book that I finished this month was Feel the Fire by Krista and Becca Ritchie. This is the 8th book in the Addicted/Calloway Sister series. This is Connor and Rose's 2nd book, and I really enjoyed this. It did start off a little bit slow for me, but by the end, I was obsessed. I feel like that happens with a lot of these books in this series. It'll start off slow and I'll be like, yeah, like it's good, but it's not like amazing. And by the end, I'm like sobbing, crying, obsessed. Like it's just a great time. I do really love Connor and Rose. They're my second favorite couple. I'm a Lilo girl forever. I can't help it. I didn't choose them, they chose me. But I had so much fun reading this. And I also ended up reading Long Way Down this month, which I wasn't expecting to read this month, but I was already missing the characters, so I decided to pick up Long Way Down, which is the 9th book, and also the last proper novel. I still have Some Kind of Perfect, and hopefully I'll pick that one up in December, but that's the epilogue novel, so it's not quite the same. But this is also Daisy and Rach's 2nd book, and I do really like them as a couple, and I think this book made me specifically like Daisy a lot more. I didn't ever dislike her, but this one just I don't know, pulled at my heartstrings a little bit. I got just even more attached to them as a couple and just Daisy especially as a person. They also just went through so much stuff in this book, they just could not catch a break, but they had a happily ever after, as these books always do. I can't recommend this series enough. You guys know I've been reading this for over a year now, and I hope that I'll be able to finish the series by the end of this year. I'm gonna be so sad to say goodbye to it, but I also know that I'm definitely gonna reread these books at some point, and I'm already excited to restart the series, especially the Addicted books, because they're just my favorite. Next, we have one of my only fantasy books of the month. I definitely go through phases, don't I? Romance phase, fantasy phase, and I'm just not in my fantasy era right now, but I'm sure it will come back. But I did read The Dragon Republic by R.F. Kuang, which is the 2nd book in the Poppy War trilogy, and I enjoyed this, but this series or this trilogy is just very, very dense, and I just don't know if it's really for me. Just the style of the story and just how heavy it is, it's definitely not a fantasy romance. So if you are a romance fantasy girly, not to say I wouldn't recommend this, but don't go into this series expecting that, because it's not that at all. It is not. It is a lot of politics, war, history. It is so interesting and so beautifully written, and the plot is so well developed, and the characters are so well developed as well, but it's just heavy. There's a lot of betrayal, there's a lot of death, and the death is described, and I'm just sometimes, So I don't know if this series is specifically for me, but I also don't really have anything negative to say about it apart from personal preference. Then we have my first ever Alice Oseman book. This is Loveless. I love these covers. I just think the colors and the little graphics are so sweet. I read this during my 24-hour readathon, so I won't talk too much about it, but this book is about a girl called Georgia who has finished high school and she goes off to college, but she starts to just feel a little bit different, a little bit left behind. It feels like everyone around her just knows who they are and fits in so easily, and is just super self-assured, and she just doesn't feel that way, and she feels like she just doesn't know who she is or what she wants, and it's just kind of a coming of age novel. It talks a lot about friendships and relationships and sexuality, and I also feel like one of the main takeaways that I really enjoyed from this book is that by the end of the novel, she kind of realizes that everyone around her, although they might look like they're really confident and self-assured, no one really knows what they're doing. No one really knows who they are, and everyone is just kind of figuring it all out together, and I really loved that element of the story. So I rated this 3.5. I honestly just really enjoyed it, but it wasn't the best book I've ever read. It wasn't a super standout, but I did really enjoy my reading experience, and I definitely want to pick up more Alice Oseman books in the future. I just love YA. I feel like it's healing my inner child in a sense, reading YA. In my 24-hour readathon, I also completed Mary Jane, and this is one of my 5-star reads from this month. I absolutely adored this. This is definitely no plot, just vibes. It is a historical fiction book about a girl who lives in Baltimore in the 1970s. I would say her family is like upper middle class, I guess, and her parents are very like snobby, I guess, like very much like we go to the country club and we have this certain reputation and only interact with certain people, you know, and just like think they're higher than everyone else. And then during the summer, Mary Jane goes to nanny for someone like in her neighborhood, one of her neighbors, and it's like her first experience of realizing that not every family looks like her family and not every family has the same beliefs and morals and values, I guess. And it just like opens her eyes a little bit, and she realizes the world is so much bigger than she originally thought, because she'd just never seen anything else before. She'd never experienced any other way of living, I guess. And it's just like her first sense of freedom, I feel like, when she spends time with this family, nannies for this family. And it's just a really beautiful story. I thoroughly enjoyed it. I thought the writing was great. The atmosphere was phenomenal. It just gave me such 70s summer Baltimore vibes. Have I ever been to Baltimore in the 70s at summer? Absolutely not. I've never been to Baltimore in general, but I could just see it in my head. It was really one of those books where it was just like a movie in my head, you know? Love this. Also in that 24-hour readathon, I started reading To All the Boys I've Loved Before by Jenny Han. I have never seen this movie, and I kind of just picked up this book because I really loved The Summer I Turned Pretty trilogy. I read that earlier this year. Absolutely adored it. Loved Jenny Han's writing. So I decided I wanted to try reading her other trilogy. I'm sure many of you have either read this or seen the movie, but I had just like no idea what this was about, and I've never seen the movie. So I picked this up and I freaking loved it. It is very YA, but like I said before, I feel like reading YA just kind of heals my inner child a little bit. And I also just really loved Lara Jean as a character. Yes, she is annoying, kind of like Belly was annoying in the Summer I Turned Pretty trilogy, but she's like a teenage girl. I'm sure all of us as teenage girls were very annoying as well, but I feel like Lara Jean was just a very relatable character to me. She loved to read, she loved to bake, she loved to do craft and scrapbooking and just kind of stay at home, and it's just kind of nice to read characters sometimes that you can just see a lot of yourself in. I gave this, I think, like 4 stars, and I think I will read anything that Jenny Han writes because, I don't know, she just creates this nostalgic teenage experience. And obviously because I loved it so much, I had to pick up the second and third book in that trilogy, and these were so good as well. I actually think the second book was my favorite out of the whole trilogy. The plot in the second book was just so good, and even just like Lara Jean as a character, I feel like she was my favorite in the second book. I gave the second book 4.5 stars and the third book 4 stars. One of the things that I loved about the second book is they play this game. Is it called Assassin? I actually don't know. It's not a game I've ever played before, but it's just this really fun game that she plays with her friend group that she's had since she was like a really young kid. And that part of the story was just so fun to me, and I just loved it so much. And there's also this like nursing home little subplot going on, and that was also just so wholesome and so sweet, and I freaking loved it. So the second book was my favorite. The third book was really good as well, and it also didn't end the way I thought it was going to end, if I'm being honest. Like, I really expected it to go a different direction. Honestly, I kind of expected this series, I think from the second book, to go in a different direction, and it didn't. So I was really surprised, and yeah, I just really enjoyed this, and I can definitely see myself rereading it in the future, which I did not expect. Like, I did not expect to love this series as much as I did, but it was just so wholesome and so sweet and so cute. Loved it so much. I need to watch the movies now. A book that I picked up on my Kindle this month was Lotus by Jennifer Hartman, and I will say I probably went in with high expectations. A lot of people compare Lotus to Archer's Voice, and as most of you probably know, Archer's Voice is my favorite romance that I've ever read, so obviously high expectations. But I also was trying to be realistic with myself and was like, I know that it's not going to be as good as Archer's Voice. Like, I don't want to go into this book expecting Archer's Voice because I'm just going to get disappointed. Like, I know I am. So I feel like I went in with high expectations because I know a lot of people love it, but I also didn't expect it to be exactly like Archer's Voice, and I'm glad that I kind of prepared myself for that, because it's definitely it's not Archer's Voice. It's got that whole like innocent boy, traumatized boy trope, if that is even a trope. In Archer's Voice, we have Archer who's been through some really rough stuff, and Bree kind of comes into his life and helps him experience life and helps him just like find joy and happiness again to an extent. And that definitely comes into play a lot in Lotus. We have a boy who was actually kidnapped and trapped, I guess, in a guy's basement for a very long time, like years and years. Like, he was kidnapped as a child and he finally escaped when he was, I don't even know how old, maybe it was like 20 years later. So I think he's in his like either late 20s or early 30s, can't remember exactly. But obviously after he escapes, he just like has no idea how the world works. He doesn't know how technology works. And his neighbor, I don't even remember her name. His neighbor was this girl and she currently lives in the same house. And when the guy escaped and was released, he went to live with his brother, who also still lived in his childhood home. So we have the guy living with his brother and then the neighbor, the girl, who was his like childhood best friend. And she kind of comes back into his life and is kind of just trying to show him how to live again, I guess. I rated this 3 stars. I think the concept is very interesting and had a lot of potential, but I just do not feel like it was executed very well, in my opinion. It just lacked in every area for me. I don't even know how to explain it. I feel like the writing wasn't great, the plot wasn't great, the romance I didn't connect with. And don't get me wrong, I know a lot of people love this book and I hope that if you read it you love it, because like I would never want someone to not enjoy a book, but it just wasn't for me. Honestly, it started off so good. Like the book started off and I was like, this is gonna be 5 stars, I'm loving this. And then as soon as I got to like 30%, there were just like small things that kept happening that were causing me to like it a little bit less, and I was getting a little bit more frustrated, and by the end I was like, let's just get this book done. Like I am not into this at all. So I'm rating it 3 stars because there were parts of it that I did like, but there were just also a lot of parts that I didn't. I kind of feel mean now because I also have a not so positive review about this book. This is called Our Secrets and Scars by Maisie Myers, and this is Maisie Myers' second book. Her first book is called The Truth About Love, and that was like a 4.5 star read for me. It was phenomenal. I loved it. I thought it was such a good story, so well written. So obviously I went into this very excited, but I rated this 2 stars. Again, I feel like mean saying bad things about books, but I also just want to share my genuine thoughts. And I honestly thought I was gonna really love this. This is a kind of like a pen pal romance. This is about a girl who goes through something pretty traumatic and her therapist suggests that she start writing letters, like get a pen pal, and so she does. But the pen pal that she chooses to write to is a guy at juvie. So the start of this book is basically just like their letters back and forth, and I think they write letters for like quite a few years, and he goes from juvie into I think like actual prison, and they continue to write letters, and then one day it all stops and she's basically like, what have I done wrong? I don't understand. Then she goes off to college, kind of moves on with her life, and then she meets this guy at college, and obviously they don't realize it, but the guy that she meets is her pen pal, the guy who was in prison and then got let out of prison and has now like kind of just like started living his own life and trying to put his life back together after being in jail. And so for most of the book they don't know who each other are, and I honestly think that concept is very interesting and a very good premise, but I just didn't feel like it was executed super well in my opinion. This book is under 300 pages and I feel like it needed to be longer to have the impact that it wanted to have. Like at the start we get told that they're writing letters for like 4 years, but we only see a handful of the letters, and so you get told that they've been writing to each other for years, but it doesn't feel like that when you're reading it. And I feel like that's the first thing that I just didn't love, because I'm not connected to you as a couple or as characters because I've only read a handful of letters in between you guys, you know? I also didn't love the pacing. It felt like there would just be problems that came out of nowhere, like had no kind of foreshadowing to them, just like popped up out of nowhere, and then they were solved way too quickly. And it just happened multiple times, and I was like, what is going on? I feel like as a whole, it just felt underdeveloped to me. We just needed more of the characters to feel that connection and to get an actual good plot, because there was a lot of spice in this book, and I feel like you can't have well, okay, you can. It depends what your preference is. I just like don't love reading books that are all spice, no plot. Like I don't care if there is spice in there, but it needs to have a good plot, or it needs to have like a good story, or I need to be connected to the characters, and I feel like it just had nothing but spice, and that's just not for me. So 2 stars, not like the worst book I've ever read. Great concept, great premise. Some of the like parts of the story I did enjoy, but overall I just feel like I needed more. I think we're going from my least favorite book of the month to my favorite book of the month. This is such a bittersweet moment, but the next book I have to talk about is Kingdom of Ash by Sarah J Maas. Wow, I think this might be one of my favorite books of the year. It was phenomenal. Like it was amazing. And this is a brick of a book. This is the last book in the Throne of Glass series. So I've completed Throne of Glass, which is wild. I started this year never having read any fantasy books. And if I had told my January self that I had just completed an 8-book long fantasy series, with the last book being 1,000 pages long, I would not have believed it. So this is just so crazy to me. But honestly, although this was 1,000 pages, I would have read it if it was 2,000 pages. pages. Like I got to the end and I was like, I want more. Like I do not want this world to be over. I do not want these characters to be gone. This was the easiest 5 stars I've ever given a book. I probably could have given it 10 stars, honestly. Like it was so good. I love how everything wrapped up. I loved seeing all of the characters, like where they all ended up, and all of the different storylines finally kind of coming together. And I grew so attached to these characters. It definitely did take me a little bit longer to get so attached to these characters compared to ACOTAR. I feel like I was like attached to the characters in the first and second book. This one took me probably like 4 books before I was even like starting to get really attached. But by this point, they genuinely feel like family. And I know so many people feel that way, which is just crazy that a book can make you feel that way. But I just cannot rave about this enough. I cannot rave about this series enough. I can't quite I think I do like it more than ACOTAR, if I'm being honest. I think I do. But also ACOTAR's not done yet, so it's kind of hard to compare a completed series to a non-complete series. But wow, this was just phenomenal. I cried multiple times, but I already can't wait to restart this series and read it again because wow. The next 2 books that I read are the second and third book in the Divergent trilogy. It almost feels weird to talk about these books in 2022 when I know that they had their like peak in what, like 2013 or something. Anyway, I'm one of those people that read The Hunger Games, loved The Hunger Games when I was like 12. Saw the movies, was obsessed. It was a great time. But for some reason, I never picked up the Divergent series. I never read it. I never saw the movies. So earlier this year, I found Divergent at a thrift store, picked it up, read it, loved it. And then later on in the year, I managed to find all of the other books at a different thrift store, and then they just sat on my bookshelf for another few months. But I ended up picking Insurgent to be on my TBR for the start of this month, so this is one of the books that I actually read for my TBR, and I enjoyed this. It was good. I rated it 3 stars. I wonder if I had read it right after reading Divergent, if I would have enjoyed it more, because I would have just like really been in that world. I feel like the concept and the plot of the first book was chef's kiss phenomenal. Loved it. This book didn't love as much, still enjoyed, just wasn't as good to me, just not my personal favorite. But I was like, I think I need to pick up the third book now, so I still like remember everything from the second book. I'm still like really in this world, and this was a great experience. Enjoyed this one a lot more than I enjoyed the second one. I feel like again the concept of this one was just really good. I really liked the plot twist, I guess, and like kind of where the storyline went. And again, I just cared a lot more for the characters, cared a lot more about like what was happening to them and what the storyline was. So overall, really enjoyed that trilogy. Such a fun time. I do still have the novella to read, which is from 4's point of view, but I literally only just finished this one up. Otherwise, I probably would have read the novella this month as well. But yeah, it was just fun. Moving on. I also read my first Alice Feeney book this month. I feel like I've heard about this author for so long, and I just am not like a huge thriller girly. I kind of want to get back into it because I don't know, part of me feels like I'm too much of a scaredy cat to read thrillers like all the time, but this was a really fun time. I really love thrillers because they just keep you on your toes. You just keep wanting to turn the page. So this is Daisy Darker. This is about a girl who, or a woman I should say, who goes to celebrate her grandma's birthday with her whole family at her grandma's house. And when they're all there, the grandma reads her will, kind of like Knives Out vibes. Everyone realizes they're not really getting any money. They're all annoyed at it. And then a few hours later, the grandma turns up dead. And everyone's like, who did this? Because it's also like a, not like locked door situation, but they're all stuck in this house and none of them can leave. So it's kind of like it's either one of us or there's someone here that we don't know is here, basically. So it was a really fun story. Each hour something happens throughout the night. I was about to say something else, but I feel like that will kind of give too much away. I feel like that's all you really need to know going in. I feel like thrillers are really fun when you just like don't really know much about them. But yeah, it was just a lot of fun. I rated this 4 stars, not my favorite book ever, but still really enjoyed. I also read one non-fiction book this month. I read The Girl Who Fell from the Sky by Emma Carey, and I actually borrowed it from my library as an audiobook because Emma Carey narrates the audiobook, and I love listening to audiobooks of memoirs when the author is the narrator. But as per usual, I don't rate memoirs. I just like don't feel right rating the story of someone's life, but I was honestly very pleasantly surprised at this book. If you don't know, Emma Carey is a paraplegic. I hope that's the right terminology. I really apologize if it's not. My camera battery just died. But as I was saying, when Emma Carey was 20 years old, she went overseas on just like a Europe holiday with one of her best friends, and she and her best friend decided to go skydiving. But when Emma jumped, something went wrong with her parachute. She explains it all in the book. It's very interesting to read about about how it all happened. But ultimately, parachute didn't work and she free fell from a crazy height. Like, it was insane. But when she landed on the ground, she realized she couldn't move her legs and obviously went to hospital, did all the things, and she realized that she had no feeling from the waist down. And she just tells her story of her going through that, the trauma of that, the recovery of that, the legal battle that went on with that, and just kind of how her life has been ever since. I've followed Emma Carey on social media for years, and obviously over the years I've been able to see her just like going through life. And I think one of the things that makes her such an inspiring person is just her sunshine personality. Like, she just always has a smile on her face. She's always just happy, loving life. She just like exudes joy, you know? And she is just so incredibly inspiring. Her words were so incredibly inspiring. I feel like because I followed her for years, I'm not sure if I'm going to enjoy the book that much because I feel like I already know so much. But honestly, it's so worth the read or the listen, however you decide to consume it. It's just one of those books that you're just like, wow, like we are so lucky to be alive, let alone live the lives that we do. And I feel like if you're struggling or if you just like need some sort of inspiration, some sort of like pep in your step, it is such a great book to read. It is just, yeah, I know it sounds so dumb to say it's inspiring because of course it's going to be inspiring. That's kind of the whole point. But even as someone who knew her story beforehand and felt like I knew like quite a lot about her, it was still just mind-blowingly inspiring to me. Like I just was like, wow. So definitely recommend. And the last book that I have to talk about is Vicious by V.E. Schwab. I'm not actually going to talk about this book too much because you're going to see it in a video I think next week. So I don't want to share too many of my thoughts, but I will say that this definitely surprised me. This is definitely not my usual style of books that I like to read, but the concept is so interesting. So it's basically about two best friends who are in college together, a very prestigious college, and they have to write this like final project. I don't know if it's a thesis or not, I can't quite remember. And one of the guys wants to write his on EOs, which means extraordinary. And I think this is technically fantasy. It's kind of like magical realism vibes. It's very much like our normal world with a couple of additions. So in this book, EOs are people who have survived near-death experiences, and for some reason, after surviving these near-death experiences, they also have some sort of added power, almost like a superpower. So some people have the ability to heal themselves, some people have invisibility, and we have a bit of like a then and now timeline where the then is the two boys in college kind of like figuring out all this stuff, and over that timeline these friends become enemies, and the now timeline is them currently being enemies. It's so interesting. I've never really read a friends to enemies stories before, and the concept is just phenomenal. Like when you read it, you're just like, wow. It kind of gives me Atlas 6 vibes. So if you liked the Atlas 6, not in the sense of like the exact same story, but just like the vibe. But after talking for about 300 years, we have made it to the end of this video. I feel like I just chatted, didn't I? Can't help myself. I just love talking about books. But I hope you guys enjoyed hearing about all the books that I read this month. As always, I had so much fun talking about them, and I'm planning on having my December TBR come out in a few days time. I'm going to use my TBR jar again because that was so fun last time. So definitely keep your eyes peeled for that, or subscribe if you haven't already so you don't miss out on that. But I love you guys so much, and I will see you in my next video very, very soon. Goodbye.